18 months after the fire in Parliament's National Assembly, the debris has still not been removed for restoration work to begin. This is despite the intention stated in May that the cleanup would be completed by today. Some MPs have now raised concerns that the Development Bank of Southern Africa, which was appointed by Parliament back in March this year to facilitate the rebuilding of this project, will not be able to meet its deadline to complete the reconstruction work by September 2025. One such concerned MP is the DA's Siviwe Gwarube, who joins us now via our video link for more on this. Great to have you on the program as always, Siviwe. Thanks very much indeed for your time. You know, this is a story that was made the front page headlines by the City Press yesterday. I think it's important to acknowledge that, where you're quoted as saying that the National Assembly is still fenced off by barbed wire and rubbish. As a start, help us paint the picture of what it's looking like there.
Look, I think one would be forgiven if they had come to Parliament 18 months ago to see the state of the precinct and to come again now and make the assessment that no work has been done. Because ultimately the work that is meant to be done in terms of the restoration, Ayanda, is meant to be divided up in parts. Number one, the big part was making sure that offices are, or at least temporary offices are rebuilt for members of Parliament that had lost their offices in the fire. Number two, we were meant to ensure that committee rooms are rebuilt so that committees can start meeting in person and not just virtually. And this is an important part of the work that we do, Ayanda, because members of the public are actually empowered and allowed to be able to observe committee meetings, because the business of Parliament is actually their business. And then number three, the big sort of milestone that DBSA and Parliament had committed to was that the rubble in Parliament and so the burnt precinct would have been cleared by the 31st of July, which is today. And it stands there as we speak. But my big concern is that there doesn't seem to be any urgency with the Speaker to say, we had publicly committed on these timelines. We are clearly not meeting them. This is now what has happened. These are the reasons why there are delays. These are the reasons why, and this is how we're going to rectify it. Because to this day now, we don't know whether, does this mean that the 2 years that DBSA had sort of said, given itself to rebuild, is that now still in play? Are we looking at, greater costs for the rebuilding project? But the presiding officers are meant to be taking South Africans along with them.
Absolutely. Part of the obvious questions I imagine that also exist is, now that we haven't met this initial deadline to have the debris moved, is it a far-gone conclusion that the rest of the timeline would have to be revised?
And that for me is the big concern, because Ayanda, we've been without a precinct for 18 months now, and ultimately we had resigned ourselves to the fact that we are probably only going to have a functioning parliamentary precinct halfway through the 7th Parliament. But the way in which Parliament is functioning now is not optimal. There's no way that the Speaker and the Chairperson of the NCOP can claim that Parliament is working as it should. As we speak, only 150 MPs can convene in Parliament at any given time at the smaller sort of temporary chamber that has been provided. There are 400 members of Parliament. And how do we expect South Africans to hold their members to account if they can't ask, why were you not in the House when a matter of this importance was being discussed? I would like to attend a committee meeting that is deliberating on legislation that is important to me. These are the things that we've got to realize, that Parliament is not a place of work for members of Parliament and politicians. It is actually the people's institution. And that's why it's got to get back to working as optimally as possible. And I think there's not much urgency with the Speaker and her team and the Secretary to Parliament. And there's almost this lackluster attitude that we must accept that this is the way that things are. Yet the Constitution says that these are the requirements of a functioning legislature.
Yeah, I mean, the irony here is that the Development Bank of Southern Africa was actually appointed with the hopes that it would be able to work faster than government itself, and that seemingly isn't the case. Have they said anything?
Look, I mean, I've only read from the comments that they provided. They seem to have a list of technical reasons why there have been delays. But at the end of the day, as you say, Parliament came to us as the oversight body that is overlooking this process and said, Public Works will not be able to deliver this project within the budget that we have, will not be able to deliver this project within the time that we need. And therefore, we are asking for a deviation in the process because, as you know, Public Works is the implementing agent for government. And they said, we are asking for a deviation. We are asking for DBSA to be the ones that implement this project. And now, instead of saying, look, DBSA hasn't erred in the projections that they had given us, or DBSA has erred, and this is how we're going to hold them accountable. The point is here, it is today is a deadline of a very big milestone that is physically to be seen, and we know that it has not been met. And why is the Speaker quiet?
Yeah. I think it was billion rand with a B had initially been made available by the finance minister to essentially get Parliament back on its feet. And one wonders, to what extent these delays might inflate that particular figure in a context where we still don't know how long the delays will last.
And that is also, again, one of the things that Parliament had indicated that they did not want, that overruns with government projects often cost a lot more than was initially budgeted for. And so now the fact that in its first hurdle, the implementing agent has now experienced delays. And that's why I'm saying to the Speaker, I've written to her and to the chairperson of the NCOP to demand these answers, to say, can we expect the same delivery timeline of 2 years now? Number two, can we expect that the 2 billion rand estimated cost is still, in fact, the cost we're going to pay? Because remember, even at the time that Treasury allocated this money, it was out of great necessity. But it doesn't mean that the country has all that money to essentially pay for an institution because of delays that could have been avoided. If the delays are unavoidable, the Speaker and the NCOP chair must take South Africans along with them and say, when we went to this part, we realized we couldn't do this part because of this. South Africans are not engineers, but they've hired engineers to do this work with South Africans' money. And so that is why we are saying, why are you quiet when you've clearly missed your own set deadlines?
Yeah, there are multiple facets to the story. There's that court case with Zandile Mafe ongoing, but there's also this public debate about whether or not this was some weird opportunity, I suppose, to actually move Parliament. How much credence do you reckon that should get? Because it almost feels, and I say this knowing very little about the behind-the-scenes machinations, that the dragging of feet is because there are people who are seriously entertaining that idea.
Look, I think the dragging of feet is twofold, Ayanda. One, I think that it doesn't suit the governing party to have a functioning parliament, because a functioning parliament requires accountability. It requires answers about how government money is spent. It requires ministers to be in the House to be questioned, and those who have done wrong, who have been named in the Zondo Commission, to be taken through the Ethics Committee. A functioning parliament is actually a really powerful institution. So in my view, I don't think that a functioning parliament is actually in the best interests of the ANC, number one. And number two, yes, of course, there are people within this debate who are saying, look, this is a great opportunity to now rebuild parliament elsewhere. But we also know that in terms of heritage laws, that institution still needs to be rebuilt. And Parliament had undertaken a study several years ago where they wanted to see the feasibility of moving Parliament up to Tshwane, where the seat of government is. And ultimately, the findings of that report indicated that the move would not make financial sense. And now here we are having to rebuild the institution, but also having to think about, do we move Parliament up to Tshwane? The reality is that this building still needs to be rebuilt. So if there is money for people to say we're moving officers, we're moving officials, we're moving parliamentary villages all the way to Tshwane, when that has never been done before, then I'd like them to point out exactly where we can afford this, especially when we are not doing enough to give front-facing service delivery departments to actually give services to the people of South Africa. Personally, I don't think that it matters where Parliament is as long as Parliament is functioning and it's serving the people of South Africa.
Absolutely. Very important story, this. Siviwe Gwarube, thanks for giving us your thoughts as we continue watching it unfold. Siviwe, of course, is the DA's chief whip in Parliament. Once again, the Development Bank of Southern Africa being quoted as saying that part of the delays there were caused by assessments being done by structural engineers and safety experts. Essentially, they picked up structural risks, they say, including mold infestation and storm water ingress in some areas. And that's the technical explanation that they're giving around why some of that debris in Parliament still hasn't been moved.